told him, "Dear, I don't love you anymore and I want a divorce." He smirked. His revenge had begun. Men are scum. I never imagined that my husband would ruin my life because I told him I didn't love him again and that I wanted a divorce. Hey, Reddit, for the sake of privacy, I will be using fake names. My husband Dave, male, 35, and I, female, 30, have been married for 3 years now. My marriage to Dave was loveless. I can't remember any day I was actually happy in the course of our marriage. I lost everything because of my stupidity. I don't know what came over that I started cheating on my husband. I thought my husband would fall on his knees and beg me when I told him I didn't love him anymore and threatened to divorce him, but instead of begging, he divorced me instead. Never in my wildest imagination would Ewell have believed that the man I married 3 years ago would be capable of such a dubious act. Truth be told, I married Dave because of his money. I met Dave through an older friend of mine. For Dave, it was love at first sight, but for me, it wasn't. I never wanted to marry Dave since I wasn't in love with him, but my parents assured me that there was more to marriage than love. They told me I would grow to love Dave as time went by, but all that never happened. Dave is a gentle, caring, and kind-hearted man. Physically, he is not my spec. He is short and bald-headed, but he is a very generous man. His generosity is what made me marry him. Dave and I got just 4 months after dating. After our marriage, I discovered that my parents lied to me and that love was an essential ingredient for any marriage to work. Dave is a nice man, no doubt, but I wasn't attracted to him, so anything he does irritates me. The more he tried to make me happy, the more I distanced myself from him. Dave made sure I never lacked anything. He provided me with everything I needed, but all that didn't move me. I wanted more. Dave wasn't a romantic guy, but he always makes sure we go on dinner dates every Friday. I dreaded every Friday night because of the dinner date reason being that I didn't want to be seen with Dave outside. I always felt ashamed any time we went outside together. No matter how I tried, I couldn't bring myself to love Dave. I felt all alone in the marriage. My loneliness pushed me to start having an affair just a year after our wedding. I started having an affair with Tom. Tom is the complete opposite of Dave. Tom is tall, cute, and loving. Tom had everything I wanted in a man, just that Tom was not as rich as Dave. Tom was jobless. I was even the one paying most of his bills. I fell in love with Tom the second I met him. It was love at first sight. Tom has this irresistible charm I can't explain. My affair with Tom continued over the years. Tom would always beg me to leave my husband for him. Initially, I thought that was impossible, but soon I began thinking about everything and concluded that life was too short for me to spend it in a loveless marriage. So I started mapping out my exit plan from the marriage. I started saving money in Tom's account. And I was discreet in my dealings because I knew there was no way Dave would forgive me if he ever found out that I was cheating on him. Tom was a complete lover boy. He always knew how to put a smile on my face. Ever since I started going out with Tom, I glowed differently because it seemed I finally found my soulmate. Even though Tom wasn't rich, he still made sure he spent the little he had on me. Time passes so fast anytime we are together. Sometimes I wish time would just stand still. Tom and I had so many things in common. We viewed life from the same perspective. If only I'd met Tom before I met Dave, maybe things would have been a little bit different. Dave is a realtor, so he was hardly around. He was always on one trip or the other, so I had time to meet with my lover Tom whenever I wanted. Sometimes he does come over to the house whenever Dave isn't around. Everything was going on smoothly until one day when Dave arrived unannounced. I bet it was our nosy neighbors that alerted him. So Dave arrived in the middle of the night on one fateful day without any notice. On that fateful night, Tom was around. I heard the doorbell ring. I was shocked because I wasn't expecting anyone. I decided to go look. And behold, I saw my husband standing outside at the front of the door. I froze for some seconds. I honestly thought I was dreaming. Dave pushed me aside and ran upstairs. It was at that point that it dawned on me that everything was real. Dave ran up and straight to our bedroom. Luckily for me, Tom had exited the room and hid himself in the kitchen. While Dave ran up to our bedroom, Tom quickly ran out from the kitchen into the living room and exited the building immediately. Here's the thing. Tom and I had always joked about this scenario countless times. In fact, we had planned what we would do in such a scenario. Tom and I had come down from the bedroom, so while I was going to check who was at the door, he went to hide in the kitchen because that was the last place anyone would go when they came visiting. So while Dave was rushing upstairs, I opened the door wide for Tom to run out. That was how I escaped being caught on that fateful day. Dave, on the other hand, felt like a fool when he came to our bedroom and didn't see anyone. His spirit immediately weakened. The way he ran up like someone who was about to catch a thief, only to be disappointed when he met an empty room. Dave took his time to move from one room to another. He checked all the rooms, even the kitchen and bathroom weren't left out of the search. When he was done, I calmly asked him why he was turning the house upside down and if he misplaced something. All of a sudden, he became dumb. He couldn't utter a word. At that moment, it dawned on me that Dave suspected me and that someone must have alerted him about my affair with Tom. I seized the opportunity and decided to turn everything around. I started crying while accusing Dave of not trusting me. I called him all sorts of names. I told him he was insecure and trying to project his insecurities on me. Dave apologized for his actions. He told me he was sorry and promised to trust me moving forward, but deep down, I knew he didn't buy any of my lies because I knew him too well. At that point, I felt bad for him. Dave was a good man and didn't deserve what I was doing to him. After that experience, I decided to end my relationship with Tom and just make my marriage work. I stopped contacting Tom all through that period, but immediately Dave went on another business trip, and somehow I found myself back with Tom. This time I decided to be very discreet. I stopped Tom from coming over to my place. Instead, I would go over to his place. Tom, on the other hand, was pressuring me to divorce Dave and get half of his property, so that we could be together fully. Truth be told, the thought of divorcing Dave scares me. I don't know if it's because I know I wouldn't get a penny. After all, Dave and I signed a prenup before our wedding, or the fact that things might not work out between me and Tom when he finds out I'm broke and only living off my husband's money. Tom asked me to choose between him and Dave. He told me that if I truly loved him as I claimed, I would divorce Dave. What Tom doesn't know is that I might lose everything after the divorce. I have not told Tom that Dave and I signed a prenup before our wedding. I don't think he would take it well if he found out. I don't want to lose Tom, and also on the other hand, I don't want to lose my comfort in all the luxury I enjoy by divorcing Dave. I'm in a state of a fiasco right now. I need advice, guys. What do you guys think I should do? Should I divorce Dave and move on with Tom, or I should end my relationship with Tom and just face my marriage? I would be in the comment section, so please be nice. Update. Hey Reddit, I'm back again. So I read your opinions, but unfortunately, I decided to go on with what my heart says. I decided to divorce my husband so I could move on with my lover. So, on one fateful day after Dave had arrived from one of his trips, I told him, "Dear, I don't love you anymore and I want a divorce." To my greatest surprise, Dave didn't even say a word. He just smirked and moved about his day like nothing happened. The next while I was still trying to figure out what was going through Dave's mind and why he was so quiet. Even though I told him I didn't love him anymore and that I wanted a divorce, Dave's lawyer arrived and slammed me with divorce papers. When I saw him that morning, I was shocked because we weren't expecting him, and Dave never mentioned that his lawyer was coming. When he handed me the divorce papers, I asked him what the paper was for, and he told me to open it so I could see for myself. I hurriedly opened the paper, and to my greatest surprise, it was divorced papers. I was shocked to my bones. I couldn't even believe my eyes. I became dumb all of a sudden. I had a lot of things I wanted to say, but I couldn't utter a word. Soon, Dave arrived. He had gone out very early that morning. Immediately he stepped in, he started throwing my things out. At that point, he dawned on me that this wasn't a prank. I held Dave and started pleading. I told him I didn't mean what I said about divorcing him and that I was only joking. It was at that moment that he started talking. He told me how he had been suspecting me for quite some time now and was only looking for the right opportunity to send me out. He reminded me about that day he arrived unannounced. He told me a neighbor and friend had told him that I usually bring one particular guy over to the house whenever he wasn't around. He told me how he pretended to go on a trip just to go lodge in a hotel, and that on that particular day, the neighbor had called him that my guest had arrived, and that was why he stormed the house unannounced. He told me that even though he didn't catch the stupid guy red-handed, there were signs that I had a guest over. He told me how he spotted 2 glasses of wine in the bedroom and also found cheap male underwear that wasn't his in the bathroom. He told me that he had always known I was cheating on him and that he was carefully mapping out his revenge plan. He also told me how he installed a CCTV camera in the house and that he has numerous unclad videos of me and Tom. At this point, my mouth was wide open. I fell on my knees and started pleading for mercy, but he pushed me away and continued throwing my things out. I honestly didn't know that Dave was aware of the fact that I had been cheating on me, but decided to keep quiet. I was perplexed. I honestly didn't know everything would generate to this level. I thought Dave would be devastated and be the one crying and begging me not to leave him. I didn't know he had been planning on how to divorce me for a long time now. I told Dave there was no way I was going to divorce him, but he threatened to release all the unclad videos of me and Tom he had on social media. Desperate to protect what was left of my dignity, I decided to sign the divorce papers. After signing the divorce papers, Dave promised to make my life a living hell. He asked me to watch and see how he was going to ruin my life. I picked up all my things and left for my parents' place. They were shocked to see me because I didn't inform them that I was coming. I narrated everything that had happened to them. To say my parents were disappointed in me was an understatement. The look on their faces says it all. I didn't need a soothsayer to tell me that my parents felt like disowning me at that moment. They called me all sorts of names you can think of, and they asked me to go back and plead with Dave to forgive. I told them there was no need and that I didn't even love him anyway. I told my parents I was in love with someone else, and maybe divorcing Dave isn't a bad thing after all. At that point, my dad lost it and slapped me. He said he would never approve of me getting married to a lowlife who can't even feed himself. My parents asked me to pack up my bags and that they were taking me back to Dave to plead on my behalf. I got so angry at my parents' persistence for me to go back to Dave that I angrily started exchanging words with them. I told them it was their greed that made them push me to get married to someone I didn't love. I told them I would have ended up fine if they had not forced me to get married to Dave because of their selfish desires. I told them I wasn't going back and walked out on them. The following day, Dave arrived at my parents' house. I thought he came to beg me to come back to him and that he had realized that he couldn't leave without me, but unfortunately, Dave's mission was different. I forgot to mention to you guys that Dave was the one who bought the house my parents were living in. After our wedding, Dave gifted my parents a house. On that day, he arrived with security and asked my parents to evacuate the house immediately. Everyone was shocked before we could say a word. The security guy had started throwing my parents things. The only things my parents came into the house with were their clothes, because Dave furnished the house before he gifted it to my parents. What broke my heart into pieces was when my parents went on their knees to plead with Dave to forgive me and let them stay in the house, but unfortunately, all their pleas went on deaf ears. Dave ignored my parents and continued perpetrating his evil act. I never knew the man I married was capable of such dubious character. I thought Dave was an angel in a human form. I never knew he was the devil incarnate. Only a devil would be so heartless to the point of chasing middle-aged people out of the house he had given them. Seeing my parents wailing broke me into pieces. For the first time, I felt helpless. Never in my wildest imagination did I think that a day like this would ever come. But I bet Dave had always prepared for a day like this because the house receipt was in his name. Thinking about it, everything makes sense now on why Dave refused to give me or my parents the house receipt. So at that moment, it dawned on me that I didn't marry a simp. After all, he was always one step ahead of me. Indeed, I was the fool. I joined my parents and siblings in pleading with Dave for forgiveness, but Dave acted like we were non-existent and continued giving orders for our things to be thrown out. With no sign of Dave tempering justice with mercy, my parents and I picked up our belongings and headed to our old house. I felt bad for my parents. From living in a beautiful apartment to now being back to their house that leaks whenever it rains. At this moment, it dawned on me that I'd let my parents down. Soon the divorce proceedings started, and it wasn't as I had anticipated. The procedure was mentally draining for me, and worst of all was that Dave made sure he frustrated me. He took everything he ever bought for me, even the engagement ring and wedding rings that I was hoping to sell, and took the money to start up something. My shameless husband took everything. The whole situation kind of revealed who Dave was. It revealed his true colors, and behind that kind of man is a monster. The more time passed, it became clearer that Dave was on a mission to frustrate me. Even the joint savings account we had together. Dave cleared everything. I was now left with nothing. Update. Hey Reddit. I'm back to update my story. I didn't expect it to get so much attention, and I never thought I would make an update. But seeing how invested everyone is, I feel it's best to let you all know what has been going on. Soon, the divorce proceedings were over, and I thought I was finally free from Dave's torture, but I was wrong. A few days after our divorce, Dave still went ahead to leak my unclad pictures on social media. I went through another hell. For days I couldn't step outside. I was ashamed of myself. 3 months after everything had calmed down, I decided to go back to Tom so we could continue our relationship. But to my greatest surprise, the fool told me he was no longer interested and that he had moved on. He told me he now has a serious girlfriend he was planning on settling down with. At first, I thought he was pulling my legs, but soon I realized that he was dead serious when a lady arrived. Tom authoritatively asked me to leave his house. He introduced me to the lady as his cousin. When I asked him about the money I was saving in his account, he told me he had an emergency, so he used the money. At that point, I almost fainted because that was my last hope. I told Tom I wasn't leaving his house until he provided me with every penny I had saved in his account. He threatened to call the cops if I refused to leave. At that point, I wanted to create a scene, but I didn't want to get into more trouble because I already had a lot on my plate. Just as I was about to leave, Tom's girlfriend followed me out and told me how he and Tom had been dating for years. She told me Tom only used me to get some cash. At that moment, I started crying. I felt used and trashed. I went home that day lost and hopeless. I couldn't think straight, and I didn't know what to do. I felt betrayed by the one I loved and risked everything for. At that point, it was like the scale in my eyes had fallen off. I started regretting everything. I felt bad for myself and most importantly, my parents. If I could turn back the hands of time, trust me, I would have done things differently. If I'd learned to love my husband, maybe I would still be married by now, but I let my lust destroy my home. After giving everything careful thought, I realized that I wronged Dave, so I decided to go see him and apologize properly for the pain I had caused him. I arrived at the house and met new faces. When I inquired about what was happening, they told me they were the new owners of the house. Apparently Dave had sold the house. I was told by security that Dave had relocated to another city. I tried getting his new contact details, but no one was willing to give it to me. I called his other number several times, but there was no response. I decided to go to his parents' house so they could at least give me his new contact, and if possible help me plead for him to forgive me and maybe accept me back, but nothing prepared me for the embarrassment Dave's mom gave me. First off, she didn't allow me to step inside. She came out and started hauling insults at me. She even called me a gold digger and accused me of ruining her son's life. She told me how she never liked me from the beginning and how she had a reservation about me. She categorically said she was happy Dave listened to her advice about signing a prenup before our wedding. She said she was glad that I was now back in the slum where I belong. I was dumbfounded by everything she was saying. I told her I was sorry and asked her to please forgive me and give me Dave's contact. She told me that would never happen and that it would be over her dead body. When I saw how adamant Dave's mom was to embarrass me, I hurriedly left the place to avoid any altercation, but I was still determined to talk to Dave. The next day, I met with Dave's childhood friend and pleaded with him to please help me with Dave's new contact. He was blatantly refused at first, but after much persuasion from me, he gave me Dave's new contact information and house address in Los Angeles. After calling Dave several times without any response, I decided to go visit him in Los Angeles. I drove all the way from California to Los Angeles. I know it sounds crazy, but I was desperate. Something told me Dave would forgive, and we can start all over again when I finally apologize for how I wronged him. Soon, I arrived at the residence and I was shocked. I knew Dave was rich, but buying a house in a gated community was another level of richness. I rang the doorbell and a lady opened the door for me. When I asked who she was, she introduced herself to me as Dave's girlfriend. Just as we were still talking, Dave arrived. If looks could kill, I would have been dead by now. He was fuming and boiling with anger when he saw me. He asked me how I got his home address, and just as I was about to open my mouth, he pushed me out of his house. He warned me to stop spamming his phone with calls and messages and that he has moved on. I told him I only wanted to apologize for how things ended between us. At that point, he looked me in the face and told me he would never forgive me and that I should get lost. I was humiliated. I left there with my head bowed on the ground. On my way back home that day, I cried hot tears. I couldn't believe how quick Dave moved on. I mean, it was just 6 months after our divorce, and he already had a lady living with him. Worst of all, the lady was pregnant. Maybe I was wrong about everything. Maybe Dave never really loved me as he claimed, because if he did, he wouldn't have moved on as quickly as he did. Honestly, I felt betrayed. That's my story, guys. Everything still feels like a dream, and I hope that I will wake up from this horrible nightmare one day.